Hey guys, tonight we step into the searing golden light of an ancient sun, the same one that scorched the backs of slaves hauling limestone, that shimmered across the Nile like liquid gold, and that once became the center of the universe for a very strange pharaoh with a very bold idea. You're standing barefoot in the sand, just outside Thebes. The air tastes like dust and copper. The stone temples are tall and silent behind you, filled with gods that watch, but do not move. And somewhere just beyond the horizon, a young royal is staring into the sky and imagining something dangerous. A world with only one god. Oh, and you probably won't survive this, by the way. Between heat stroke, plagues, and the occasional collapsing sun temple roof, your odds aren't great. But hey, it's not about survival, it's about the story. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is. I'm always curious who's drifting off to ancient history at 2 a.m. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the desert as dawn breaks, the light crawling up your arms like fire ants. The air still carries the cold bite of night, but the sun rises fast here, and it means business. Somewhere far off, a chorus of ibis birds croaks along the Nile. The year? Hard to say exactly, but you're in the 14th century BCE, around 1350-ish, give or take a decade, because Egyptologists still argue over the precise timelines like it's a game of ancient Sudoku. Your sandals scuff the packed dirt of a civilization that's already old. The pyramids. Ancient history even now. You're walking in the shadow of dynasties stacked like nesting dolls, each pharaoh trying to outdo the last with bigger statues, more elaborate temples, and names that might take a full minute to pronounce. The gods? Oh, there are plenty. There's Ra and Horus and Amun and Isis and dozens more, all playing celestial politics while mortals scramble to keep up. But tonight's story doesn't start in the afterlife. It starts with a boy, a quiet one, thin, awkward, not much for battle drills, born Amenhotep. Amun is satisfied. He's a prince in the mighty 18th dynasty, a family already thick with power, incest, and divine ambitions. His father is Amenhotep III, a king who basically turned Egypt into a luxury resort. Under his rule, the empire sparkled, full of gold, diplomacy, and the occasional massive lion hunt for fun. Amenhotep IV, our future sun-worshipping pharaoh, isn't even supposed to be king. That gig was likely lined up for an older brother, but fate does what it always does in these stories. It clears the path. Sickness, sudden death, maybe palace intrigue, no one really knows. But by the time Amenhotep III is nearing the end of his reign, his strange, sickly son is the only heir left standing. And standing he is, thin legs planted in ornate sandals, long face peeking out from behind ceremonial makeup. He doesn't fit the mold. Artists struggle to carve him like a proper royal. His limbs are too gangly, his skull oddly shaped, his belly almost soft-looking. Centuries later, people will wonder, was he ill? Was he intersex? Was it just stylized art? No one agrees. But at least one scribe probably got scolded for making the statue look too accurate. You follow young Amenhotep through palace halls lit with oil lamps. Servants bow, priests chant. But the boy's eyes aren't on them. They're always drifting upward, toward the open windows, where the sunlight dances in like gold dust. He doesn't just worship the gods. He watches the light itself, the warmth, the power, and you get the sense that the gears are already turning behind those heavy-lidded eyes. One morning you pass him seated near a temple, fingers tracing patterns in a sunbeam like he's decoding it. He murmurs something. Aten. It's not a new word. Aten, the sun disk, has been a part of Egyptian religion for centuries, but to him it's not part of the religion. It is the religion, the only one that matters. He isn't king yet, but the sun already seems to favor him. Later that year, the court grows tense. His father, the old Amenhotep, is fading. Rumors drift like incense smoke about the king's swollen limbs, his faltering memory, his bloated grandeur. His many wives and advisors begin shifting loyalties, whispering in corridors. Succession is coming. But not everyone wants this awkward boy with the dreamy gaze to be next in line. Still, tradition carries weight. The gods supposedly picked this family, and the bloodline must continue. So, Amenhotep IV is crowned, trumpets sound, offerings are made. And somewhere deep in the inner sanctum of Karnak, Amun's high priests probably mutter under their breath, because something about this new pharaoh feels off. He doesn't do the usual royal things. He skips key festivals. He shows little interest in military parades. Instead, he orders new shrines built. Not for Amun, but for Aten. At first, people shrug it off. Kings have always added their favorite gods to the lineup. But then he renames himself. He drops Amenhotep, the name praising Amun, and starts calling himself Akhenaten, effective for the Aten. Yeah, that's not just a new name, that's a line in the sand. You're there when the first sun temples go up. Not pyramid-like, but open to the sky, with no roofs to block the rays. Rituals are performed in blazing heat. Priests wear almost nothing, baking as they chant. The offerings are made not in dark sanctuaries, but in full sunlight. And there's Akhenaten, arms raised, eyes closed, smiling like someone who just invented solar power. It's hot, it's weird, and it's only just beginning. You're trailing a royal litter now, jostling on a dusty road behind a column of guards, watching the desert roll by like an endless canvas of tan and gold. Inside the shaded canopy, a young pharaoh, still barely out of his teens, sits cross-legged, staring again at the sky. His name is still Amenhotep IV at this point, though not for much longer. His skin shines with perfumed oil, his posture oddly relaxed for someone whose every move is being watched, critiqued, gossiped about by priests and generals alike. He doesn't care. Not really. You get the feeling he's already thinking 10 steps ahead about light and eternity and maybe even architecture. But right now you're headed back in time, to when he was just a boy in Thebes. Let's rewind a bit. You sneak into the palace gardens, past the lotus pools and date palms, where young Amenhotep runs barefoot through the reeds. He's no warrior prince, not yet. He prefers reading or long hours listening to court scholars drone about theology. His tutors, all paid very well not to get annoyed, try to steer him toward the expected path. Glory in battle, praise of the gods, respect for the sacred traditions of Ma'at, the cosmic order of things. But Amenhotep has a habit of asking weird questions. Why does a moon hide in shadows while Aten shines for everyone? Or, if Ra sails the sky each day, where does Aten go at night? Harmless stuff, unless you're a high priest of Amun, and your entire salary depends on the sun, God not being the only game in town. He's the second son, after all, not the heir. So everyone shrugs off his obsessions, his private little devotions to Aten. They roll their eyes when he insists that offerings be made to sunlight, and that maybe all those statues of jackal-headed gods could be, streamlined. But then the older brother, likely named Thutmose, just vanishes. Historical records say almost nothing. Some scholars believe he died of illness. Others suspect a quiet, politically convenient removal. Your classic, oops, he fell into the crocodile pool sort of palace mystery. Historians still argue whether it was natural or accidental with sharp objects. Either way, Amenhotep IV is now the crown prince, and suddenly all those strange questions about Aten aren't harmless anymore. You peek into royal ceremonies where the mood shifts palpably. The high priests now have to take this boy seriously. You can almost hear the stress in the clenching jaws of Karnak's temple elite. They sense what's coming and they do not like it. You're watching an empire full of gods brace for a storm, and it's coming from the east, glowing and quiet like morning light. Fast forward again. Amenhotep IV takes the throne. Trumpets, papyrus scrolls, golden collars. But beneath the glitter there's tension. Usually new pharaohs make a big show of piety to Amun-Ra, god of creation and empire. Not this one. At his coronation he mentions Aten alongside Amun, which is already considered mildly scandalous, like thanking your podcast sponsor before the deity of the universe. Still, he plays the part. For a bit. There's a delicate few years where he tries to balance things, making offerings to Amun, but also throwing serious shade in favor of Aten. He commissions sun courts, open-air altars, and hymns written not to gods with animal heads, but to light itself. No myth, no magic. Just radiant, burning energy. Kind of poetic, really. Also deeply inconvenient if you're in charge of, say, embalming sacred bulls for a living. And speaking of poetry, you stumble across a curious bit of fringe history. Rumor has it that young Amenhotep IV dabbled in writing his own hymns. One, called the Great Hymn to the Aten, is so filled with devotion and detail that scholars still argue whether he actually penned it himself. It's like a love letter to the sun, dripping with spiritual awe. Lines like, "You rise in perfection on the horizon of the sky." Not bad for a guy who also probably thought wearing eyeliner was a personality trait. But here's where it gets really spicy. You're standing in the House of Life, a library/scriptorium near Thebes, when the news spreads. The king is changing his name. From Amenhotep, Amun is satisfied, to Akhenaten, which means effective for the Aten. That's not just name change drama. That's like the Pope deciding he's now Greg, the chill atheist. Amun's priests are furious. Their power is rooted in ritual, tradition, and deeply confusing temple calendars. Akhenaten, meanwhile, seems ready to rewrite reality. He starts funding Aten temples with royal gold. He cuts support to Amun's institutions. Whole statues of the old gods begin to quietly disappear. Not destroyed yet, but quietly removed from public sight like embarrassing relatives at a royal wedding. You wander through Thebes one late afternoon and notice something odd. The temples are quieter. The incense doesn't rise as thick. The lines of petitioners at the gates are thinner. A shift is happening, and not everyone can name it yet. But the old order is dimming, and the sun is beginning to burn alone in the sky. Meanwhile, Akhenaten isn't hiding his preferences. He starts appearing in public ceremonies not just as a king, but as the sole mediator between humanity and Aten. There's no middleman, no helpful pantheon. If you want blessings, you go through Akhenaten, because he's the chosen one, hand-picked by the sun disk itself. He's Moses, Jesus, and a touch of Elon, all rolled into one eyebrow-raising royal package. And then comes the real shocker. He starts designing a new city. You're sitting in a court meeting as he sketches, literally sketches, with reed pen on a slab of limestone. He wants it east of the Nile, in a patch of desert where no one else has ever built. A blank canvas, a place where Aten can shine without the pollution of other gods' temples or priests' complaints. And what does he call it? Akhetaten, the horizon of Aten. You're going to want to pack water. Because this story, it's about to head straight into the sun. You've been walking for hours. Your feet crunch over gravel, powdered limestone, and the occasional sun-bleached lizard bone. There's no Nile here, no shady sycamore trees or temple columns to lean against. Just a whole lot of shimmering heat, vibrating off the horizon like the sky's got a secret. But you're not lost. You're exactly where Akhenaten told you to be, on a blank page in the middle of nowhere. Because this is where he plans to write his masterpiece, a brand new city, forged in sunlight and silence. You're not the only one here. There's a whole royal entourage behind you, scribes, architects, engineers, guards, and a few exhausted donkeys. They've followed the king from Thebes, watching as he lifts his arms to Aten, that radiant disk above, and proclaims, "This is the place." Just like that. No consultations, no water source, no defensible terrain. The military advisors probably exchange some very unroyal glances, but Akhenaten doesn't care. He sees something they don't, an unspoiled place where no other god has ever been worshipped, where no temple of Amun, no statue of Thoth has ever cast a shadow, a place untainted by tradition. That's kind of his thing now. If it came before him, it's probably wrong. So he orders boundary stelae carved into the cliffs, giant inscriptions etched into rock, like ancient coming soon billboards. They proclaim that this land is sacred to Aten, and that no other god will be worshipped here. It's bold, it's permanent. It's also really hard to undo with a chisel. You stand beside one of these stelae, feeling the stone under your palm still warm from the sun. The inscriptions go on for pages, praising Aten, outlining the royal vision, and just a tiny bit of humble bragging about Akhenaten's divine role in it all. You look up and realize he's not just founding a city, he's building a kingdom inside his own brain. And now everyone else has to live in it. Construction begins almost immediately. No committees, no back and forth debates. He wants this done fast, because who needs stability when you've got spiritual momentum? Workers pour in from across Egypt, skilled artisans, sculptors, even some foreign laborers. Mud brick walls rise like waves. Limestone is dragged from quarries and carved into lintels and lotus-shaped capitals. It's chaos, but organized chaos. The kind that comes with enough royal pressure and absolutely zero patience. And here's the wild part. This isn't some tiny temple complex. This is a full-blown metropolis. Akhenaten wants palaces, open-air temples, wide avenues, gardens, storage houses, government buildings. Even the city's orientation is precise, aligned so that the sun rises directly between the cliffs flanking the eastern horizon. So when Aten wakes up each day, it's not just dramatic, it's theatrical. You watch the city come to life in phases. The great palace, sprawling and lavish, rises close to the river. It has roofed halls, open courts, and painted floor tiles showing animals from distant lands, gazelles, butterflies, and even imported baboons. You suspect at least one baboon was a mistake, because they keep stealing the workers' bread. Across the road, the king's house goes up, a smaller royal residence where Akhenaten can live day to day without being swallowed by ceremonial madness. Think of it like his weekend apartment, except it's still gigantic and covered in gold leaf. Then there's the Gempaten, the Temple of the Aten. It's not a temple like the old ones. No darkness, no secret inner chamber. It's open to the sky. Always. The altar sits out in the sun, where sacrifices are made under full exposure to the god. If you're a priest, this is either a glorious new era or the world's hottest performance review. And you notice something strange in the architecture. Reliefs and carvings show Akhenaten and his family, again and again, offering gifts to Aten. Always with the sun's rays reaching down toward them, ending in little hands that hold ankhs, the symbol of life. No gods with animal heads, no crowd of deities bickering over souls, Just one celestial body, reaching lovingly down to one very elongated royal family. It's weirdly intimate. The king isn't just the ruler. He's the chosen one, the only human Aten really cares about. Everyone else? Support staff. And speaking of support, Nefertiti is everywhere, literally everywhere. You see her on columns, on statues, in temple reliefs, standing beside the king in equal size and posture. Sometimes she's even smiting enemies or wearing crowns usually reserved for male rulers. It's not clear whether she was co-regent, semi-divine, or just really good at ancient PR. Scholars still debate how much power she actually wielded, but she's clearly central to this city's image, and honestly, she's got better cheekbones than most of the gods she replaced. You walk through the workers' quarters next, rows of modest homes packed together like desert honeycombs. The city's population swells, tens of thousands by some estimates. There are bakers, bead makers, potters, stone cutters, scribes. Little kids run through the streets, shrieking, barefoot and sun-browned. A woman shouts at them from a rooftop, waving a wooden spoon that hasn't changed in design in 3,000 years. Some things never change. In a workshop, you watch as sculptors carve statues in the Amarna style, a whole new visual aesthetic introduced by Akhenaten's regime. Bodies are long and fluid, bellies slightly protruding, faces serene but alien-looking. They don't look like warriors. They look soft, thoughtful, like people who'd rather be lying in the sun than swinging a mace. And one quirky tidbit you overhear in the sculptor's quarters: the noses are deliberately off. Slight asymmetry is added by royal decree, because only the Aten is perfect. The king? Just divinely weird. As the sun dips behind the cliffs, the white stones of Akhetaten glow pink and orange. You sit on a rooftop, sweating, dizzy, and wondering if your brain is cooking. This city, it shouldn't exist. It was born too fast, on land too dry, by a king too obsessed. But here it is, gleaming, buzzing with devotion, a living prayer to the sun. And above it all, Aten burns silently, never blinking. You wake to sunlight again. Not just any sunlight, prescribed sunlight, measured, marked, and honored, as always, by the ever-watchful gaze of Aten. In Akhetaten, there's no such thing as a casual sunrise. Every morning, the city stretches and yawns beneath a ritual. You're up with the smell of baking barley bread and goat dung smoke, and out on the streets with the first chants echoing from open-air altars. The king has reshaped not just buildings, but time itself. The old calendar, structured around the festivals and feasts of dozens of gods, is now a parade of Aten-focused devotion. No more barks of Amun sailing downriver to thunderous applause. No more carnivals of Bastet with wine and cats. Instead, daily offerings to the light. Daily praise to the disk. Akhenaten emerges each day from the king's house, flanked by daughters, barefoot, serene, with his arms lifted to Aten. You join the swelling crowd on the avenue, watching in rehearsed awe as the royal family reenacts the same gesture again and again, palms raised, incense swirling, heads tilted just so. It's beautiful, in a rigid kind of way. But behind the display, you start to feel the city tighten. Because ritual repetition may soothe some, but for many Egyptians, used to a spiritual buffet, it feels like starvation. Still, Akhenaten pushes on. He sends sculptors and artisans deeper into their strange new style. Faces grow more angular, bellies more bulbous, limbs stretch into elegant swoops. You spot a relief showing the king with a misshapen skull and pendulous hips, cradling his infant daughter in what can only be described as a surprisingly tender dad pose. It's weird and warm and unnerving, all at once. Scholars still debate whether the art reflects Akhenaten's real appearance, an exaggerated ideal, or just his need to be different. Either way, you're pretty sure his statues wouldn't do well on Instagram. And Nefertiti? She is everywhere still, sometimes alone, sometimes with daughters, always radiant. In one scene, she's smashing enemies beneath a chariot wheel. In another, she's leading prayers while Akhenaten lounges nearby. You start to suspect she might be running the place while he contemplates solar metaphysics. There's even a popular theory, whispered in workshops and hinted at in damaged inscriptions, that she may have ruled outright toward the end of Akhenaten's reign. Historians still argue whether she became co-regent under the name Neferneferuaten, or even ruled independently as Pharaoh after his death. She might just be Egypt's most elegant question mark. But even as the art glows and the rituals shimmer, cracks form beneath the surface. In the side streets, merchants complain. The move to Akhetaten disrupted trade routes. Grain shipments are late. Pottery production is down. No one's quite sure who to bribe anymore. The old priesthoods, disempowered, displaced, aren't around to keep local economies humming. You overhear a baker muttering, "Aten can't eat bread," which earns him a sharp glance from a city guard. Meanwhile, Amun's temples in Thebes aren't exactly rolling over. They've lost land, income, and status. But they've still got friends. Wealthy ones, military ones. Akhenaten's religious revolution might be divine up here in the desert, but downriver? It's a slow-burning rebellion of the sidelined. You're there the day Akhenaten orders the names of old gods erased from monuments. Literally, he sends teams of stonemasons to chip out the hieroglyphs of Amun from temples across Egypt. It's the ancient equivalent of hitting delete on someone's Wikipedia page. You walk past defaced shrines, chipped cartouches, scraped walls where once thriving gods are now blank. It's both shocking and oddly quiet. No fanfare, just sandstone dust and silence. And then the dream gets stricter. Akhenaten decrees himself not only king, but the sole voice of Aten. People can no longer just pray directly to the sun. They must go through him. It's like spiritual customer service with one overworked representative and a long wait time. Even festivals become more about him being blessed than about Aten shining equally on all. You watch one such festival unfold, bright canopies, music, dancers, until the mood sours. A worker collapses from heat stroke. No one stops the ceremony. The sun watches, the drums play, and the ritual must go on. And yet, the people still come. Because even if they're unsure, even if they miss the warmth of Hather's laughter or the justice of Maat, this is the center of royal power now. This is where grain gets distributed, where decisions get made. And in Egypt, where the pharaoh goes, so does everyone else, willing or not. But you start to notice subtle resistance. In a potter's workshop, a child draws a tiny falcon in the clay, Horakti, a god no longer mentioned. A farmer mutters a prayer to Osiris before digging irrigation trenches. One of the temple guards still wears a pendant of Thoth hidden beneath his linen collar. The people haven't forgotten. They're just waiting, watching, whispering under their breath when the sun is too bright to hear. And one evening, just before sunset, you stand by a stela outside the city. The stone glows pink in the fading light, carved with praise to Aten and devotion to Akhenaten. But in the lower corner, you notice a crude carving someone tried to hide, a tiny jackal's head. Anubis, god of the dead, scratched back into the world with a stone shard. It's defiant, quiet, but it's there. Because even here in the horizon of Aten, the old gods have long memories. And the sun, as radiant as it may be, always sets. By now, you've been in Akhetaten long enough that the daily rhythms are carved into your bones, like those temple inscriptions no one's allowed to pray at anymore. You know when the sun will hit the palace walls just right, how long the bread queue lasts before it turns into a grumble fest, and which street corners smell most suspiciously like fermented fish. And you've noticed something. The royal family is everywhere, and not just in the palace or temples. They're in your breakfast bowl, your wall paintings, and your dreams, if you're not careful. This family isn't just ruling, they're performing. Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their 6 daughters are a public presence, almost aggressively so. You don't just hear about them, you see them constantly. You spot murals showing them riding chariots through the city, enjoying picnics in lush palace gardens, playing with pet monkeys, and kissing their babies on the forehead like it's ancient Egyptian Instagram. There's even one scene of the royal couple sharing a tender moment under the rays of a 10, their faces turned slightly toward each other in a not-so-ancient selfie pose. You'd swear the caption would read, "Number sign, blessed number sign, sun life." But here's the twist. This level of royal intimacy? Totally new. In older dynasties, pharaohs barely acknowledged their kids in art. Here, Akhenaten proudly cradles his daughters, Nefertiti leans into him, and the sunbeams above them reach down like divine fingers, offering life and Instagram filters. You're told this is all part of the theology now. The royal family isn't just royal, they're divine intermediaries. A 10 shines down on them, and they in turn pass that divine light to the people, like a sunbeam Wi-Fi router but with more jewelry. You start to pay closer attention to the daughters. There are 6, and each one seems to appear in a new stage of life before the last has fully grown. Some scholars think this is a result of rushed art production. Others wonder if the images are symbolic rather than literal, a royal way of showing a 10's blessings multiply over time. And yes, historians still argue whether these daughters had real political roles or were just there to fill a divine family portrait. Either way, you've seen more carved baby curls than you thought possible in one lifetime. But here's where things get weirder. You come across a statue, a beautifully carved piece showing one of the daughters, likely Meritaten, nearly life-sized and, well, regal, not childlike. She's posed like a future queen, maybe even a ruler in her own right. And the rumors swirl louder. If Nefertiti fades from the public eye toward the end of Akhenaten's reign and Meritaten rises, could she have taken up a kind of co-ruler status too? The line between royal daughter, wife, and regent gets blurry fast. Some statues show Akhenaten's daughters standing in positions once reserved for queens. Some scenes hint at family marriages, though it's hard to say where ritual ends and reality begins. And if that makes your head spin, you're not alone. Egyptologists are still piecing it all together like a 3,000-year-old family drama with half the cast missing. You find the court gossip picking up heat. People whisper in alleys and by the bread ovens. They're confused, sometimes even uncomfortable, with how visible the royal family is, how human they seem. It's all a bit too intimate. One artisan jokes that he's carved more baby toes this month than actual hieroglyphs. Another mutters that a 10 shines too much on one family and not enough on the rest. And yet there's something magnetic about them. Nefertiti in particular captures the city's imagination. Her statues are breathtaking, long neck, high cheekbones, those almond eyes that seem to follow you across the room like she's judging your choice in sandals. You learn that her name means the beautiful one has come, and you can't argue with it. You've seen the limestone bust, half finished in the workshop of Thutmose, and it stops people in their tracks. But her presence is more than aesthetic. In some reliefs, she wears the blue war crown typically reserved for pharaohs. In others, she's leading ceremonies without Akhenaten beside her. Is she queen, co-ruler, shadow pharaoh? Historians still argue whether her role was ceremonial or genuine leadership. Either way, she casts a long, graceful shadow, one almost as enduring as the sun's. One day, you're outside the temple precinct when a new mural is unveiled. It shows the entire royal family beneath Aten's rays, but something's changed. The daughters are older. Nefertiti is gone. Instead, there's a second figure beside Akhenaten who looks eerily like her, or possibly her daughter, maybe even both. The inscriptions are damaged, vague, as though someone tried to revise the script halfway through. Your gut says power is shifting, and this right here is when the whole city's mood subtly darkens. The rituals continue, the temples gleam, the artisans still paint sunshine on every surface, but the public appearances are less frequent. Nefertiti stops being mentioned in formal documents. Some think she died. Others claim she simply stepped into a new role, perhaps even took on a male identity to rule as Pharaoh. A few fringe theories whisper that she became Smenkhkare, a briefly ruling figure whose identity is still a historical headache. No one's sure. But her absence feels deliberate, and Akhenaten, he becomes even more isolated. Fewer chariot rides, fewer warm portrayals. You pass by a relief showing him alone before Aten, arms raised, face stretched into that serene alien calm. The rest of the family is missing. The sun shines brighter than ever, but it shines on just one man now. You linger on the thought as the sun lowers over Akhetaten, throwing long shadows across the courtyards and colonnades. It's getting harder to tell where the performance ends and the faith begins. The city glows on, a perfect mirage, and deep inside the palace, the most unusual family Egypt has ever known begins to disappear, one by one, into the heat haze of history. You wake to a city not quite the same as yesterday. Something in the air has shifted. It's subtle, like noticing your favorite street performer isn't at their usual corner, or that the market's a little quieter, the gossip a little more hushed. Akhetaten is still gleaming in the morning sun, sure, but there's a tension humming under the limestone surface, like a string pulled too tight, waiting to snap. Akhenaten hasn't been seen in public for weeks. The royal chariot no longer makes its slow loop through the sunlit streets. The daughters, who once giggled and danced in murals with Aten rays cradling their tiny faces, appear less and less in art. Some say one or two of them have died. Others claim they were married off or cloistered away in the house of the king to fulfill roles too sacred or too strange to name aloud. And Nefertiti? Still missing. Her name now appears only in erased or reworked inscriptions, as if someone is trying to rewrite her right out of the story. Theories spread like wild barley. Was there a plague? Maybe. Akhetaten was built fast, and poor sanitation combined with Nile humidity isn't exactly the healthiest mix. You've seen more funerals lately, and more papyrus bundles soaked with herbs, pressed to feverish foreheads. Some fringe thinkers even whisper of an epidemic that wiped out chunks of the royal household. Historians still argue whether Akhenaten's family fell victim to disease, internal collapse, or something much more political. But here's what you do know. Akhenaten seems changed. He stops attending public rituals. When he does appear, he's gaunt, more statue than man, and surrounded by an increasingly tight circle of guards and advisors. One of them is a name you overhear more often now, I. Not a royal, but a high-ranking court official with a nose for survival. He seems to be everywhere lately. Smiling just enough. Helping just enough. Some say he was once close to Nefertiti. Others claim he's positioning himself for something bigger. Then there's General Horemheb, a very different energy. Tough, clean-shaven, definitely not a sun-disk poet. He's not a fan of the Aten-only religion, and definitely not a fan of art that makes the king look like an extraterrestrial spaghetti noodle. You catch wind that he's been stationed outside Akhetaten, reorganizing the army and, just maybe, waiting for his moment. Meanwhile, inside the city walls, the ordinary people are growing restless. Markets are drying up. Trade with Nubia and the Levant is sluggish. The temples of Aten, lavish and open-roofed, require more resources than they return. You pass by a group of workers patching cracks in a shrine. One mutters, "Even the stones are tired of singing to one god." His supervisor shushes him instantly, but the sentiment lingers. You see scribes quietly re-inking old names. Mut, Isis, Thoth. They reappear in personal letters and tomb walls outside the city. Not public yet, but not quite hidden either. The old gods aren't dead. They're just biding their time. The city's foreign relations are a mess, too. You peek over the shoulder of a courier unrolling diplomatic tablets. Clay letters from faraway kings asking for military support, trade goods, marriages. Many go unanswered. Akhenaten seems uninterested or too distracted. Maybe both. One letter from a desperate vassal pleads for Egyptian troops as invaders approach. It ends with a line, "Why have you abandoned us?" You wonder if the king even read it. But amid all this uncertainty, a new figure appears on the horizon. Smenkhkare, a name with no clear face. One day it's scrawled onto a temple doorway. The next, it's being spoken in the House of Life as Pharaoh in training. Some believe Smenkhkare is Akhenaten's younger brother. Others say he's a son, or even Nefertiti under a new name. Some think he's the husband of Meritaten. There are even fringe whispers that he's a placeholder ruler, meant to smooth things over while something bigger brews behind palace doors. Historians still argue whether Smenkhkare was real, symbolic, or a hastily patched solution to a problem too dangerous to name aloud. You only see him once, briefly, in a parade. Slim figure, partially obscured by a canopy. He doesn't wave. He doesn't speak. He's just there, and then gone. The people don't know what to make of it, or him, or any of it. You find yourself back at the great boundary stela one afternoon. The sun hits it differently now, longer shadows carving across the words Akhenaten, once etched with fervor. The promise of a new city, a pure city, a god-kissed utopia, now dulled by time and neglect. You trace the line that reads, "No other god shall be worshipped here." But you know, just 2 streets over, someone's lighting incense to Hathor again. You smelled it. You heard the quiet hymn, half-whispered, half-defiant, because people are still people, and gods, especially old ones, aren't easy to forget. Then comes the moment no one expected, or maybe everyone did. Akhenaten dies. It happens quietly, no parades, no processions. One day he's simply gone. You hear it first from a brewer's assistant, who heard it from a stable boy, who heard it from a palace guard whose cousin saw a group of priests crying. It's not announced publicly. Not yet. But the city feels it, like someone blew out the sun. And just like that, Akhenaten stands at a cliff's edge. It's God King. It's visionary. It's central sunbeam. Extinguished. No successor officially named, no divine plan laid bare. Just a lot of sandstone, a lot of sun, and an awful lot of questions. You pause near the palace gates that evening. The city's strangely quiet, the sky streaked red with the kind of sunset that should have inspired joy here. But it doesn't. Not tonight. The rays of Aten still reach down, but they don't seem to touch anyone anymore. The city doesn't collapse overnight, but it definitely starts to lean. In the wake of Akhenaten's death, Akhenaten feels like a grand theater after the final act. Sets still standing, costumes hanging in wardrobes, scripts half-scrawled. But the stars gone, and no one knows whether to bow or bolt. You step out into the courtyard the morning after the news spreads, and for the first time in years, no hymn to Aten rises with the sun. No trumpets, no incense, just birdsong and a whole lot of awkward silence. Who's in charge now? Depends on who you ask. Some say Smenkhkare is Pharaoh now, though no one's sure where he actually is. His name appears briefly on boundary stelae and temple lintels, scribbled in half-hearted cartouches. But within a few months, blink, he's gone. No funerals, no grand send-off. Just erased. You walk past a mural one afternoon and notice a figure chipped away, face smoothed over. Could have been him. Could have been someone else. Even the walls seem unsure. And then Tutankhaten, the boy, barely 9, a name nobody expected to matter, suddenly painted in gold leaf across palace corridors. He's the son of Akhenaten, probably, or maybe the son of Smenkhkare, or possibly both, or neither. Historians still argue whether Tutankhaten was the biological child of Akhenaten and one of his sisters, or a more political pick, slotted into power to calm the chaos. You catch sight of him during a festival that's trying very hard to look normal. A tiny figure in a ceremonial chariot, feet barely reaching the floor, waving with the same stiff motion as a puppet on strings. His wife, yes, wife, is riding beside him. She's not much older. Her name is Ankhesenpaten, and yes, that's one of Akhenaten's daughters. Your jaw drops when you put it together. Married to her half-brother, or full brother. Welcome to dynastic politics, where the family tree folds like a napkin. Still, behind that royal facade, the real power belongs to others now. I, the careful, ever-present official, emerges as a guiding hand. He's Tutankhaten's advisor, possibly even orchestrator of this child pharaoh setup. I's not flashy, not poetic, but he's got deep roots and deeper plans. And then there's Hormheb, the general, quietly tightening his grip on the military like someone making sure the safety net's in place, in case that child king drops the crown. Meanwhile, the mood across Egypt is shifting, fast. Temples that once rang with praise to a 10 now stand eerily quiet, sunbeams falling through empty colonnades. Priests of Amun, long suppressed, begin to stir like crocodiles waking from a nap. You hear whispers on the road to Memphis. The old gods are returning. You see small, cautious offerings at wayside shrines, figures of Bastet tucked into baskets, amulets of Thoth worn on cords again. The name Tutankhaten doesn't last long. One day, a new cartouche appears, Tutankhamun. A simple change, one syllable, and yet a complete ideological backflip. From living image of Aten to living image of Amun. You stand there reading it, heart thudding a little faster. It's subtle, but it's seismic. The boy king has just renounced his father's god. You peek into temple records and see it playing out in ink and stone. Restoration decrees are issued. Old temples are reopened. Statues of Amun, Mut, and Khonsu are dusted off and paraded again through Thebes. Akhenaten's name, scratched off lists, his monuments, left to the sand. Some even say his mummy was removed from its original tomb, stashed away in a less conspicuous place to avoid divine awkwardness. Even Akhenaten itself starts to unravel. The capital is abandoned gradually, like a party everyone sneaks away from once the lights go up. The administrative staff moves first, scribes, treasurers, messengers, then the soldiers, the temple attendants, the artisans. You pack up your things and follow the slow river of humanity, drifting back to Thebes, to Memphis, to places where the old gods never left. The desert reclaims the avenues. Sand blows through royal courtyards once bright with Aten's rays. You look back just once from the edge of a caravan trail. The city still shines faintly under the noonday sun, but only in parts. The rest is faded, like chalk drawings after a rainstorm. By the time you reach Thebes, the narrative is clear. Akhenaten was a heretic, a disruptor, a mistake. He's not mentioned in polite company anymore, and when he is, it's with a wince and a quiet curse. But you remember, You remember the glowing white temples, the royal family picnics, the way Nefertiti's eyes seemed to follow you across a room. You remember the first time you heard the hymn to Aten, and it felt like sunrise in your chest. Sure, it all collapsed. Maybe it was always going to. But it was real. For a while. Tutankhamun rules for nearly a decade, guided or steered by Eye and Horemheb. He dies young, probably from illness or injury. Historians still argue whether it was malaria, a fractured leg, or a complex medical combo plate of royal inbreeding. He's buried hastily in a tomb meant for someone else. Not grand, not glorious, but sealed tight. Centuries later, when Howard Carter opens it, the world will rediscover this boy king. But they won't realize that inside that gold mask, glittering like the morning sun, is the face of a dynasty built on solar dreams and then buried by the old god's return. For now, you watch as A steps in as Pharaoh, not by blood, but by sheer persistence. Then Horemheb, the general, takes the reins after him. The tide has turned fully. Amun reigns again. The old temples swell with offerings, and Akhenaten, his name becomes a smudge in the historical record, a lesson in what happens when you fly too close to the sun without the proper priestly paperwork. You wander past temple walls freshly carved with victories and tributes. The art is back to normal, rigid, idealized, perfect. No elongated skulls, no sunbeam smooches, no baby daughters waving to the crowd. Just timeless, tidy order. Safe, familiar, forgettable. And yet, as the sun sinks behind the horizon and the temple shadows stretch long across the stones, you can't help but wonder, what if Akhenaten had been right? You return to the city years later, not as a resident, but as a traveler chasing ghosts. The desert has swallowed most of Akhetaten now. Its once crisp avenues are half buried in dunes, wind-worn stelae jutting out like broken teeth. You walk the same path you used to take to the open temple, where sunlight poured through the roof and priests chanted to a faceless god. Now, sand crunches underfoot, and only lizards bask in the sacred courtyards. But you remember. You remember the laughter, the painted walls, the music that floated across the Nile in the early evenings. You close your eyes and try to hear it again, but all you catch is the wind and the soft creak of old stone. This place was never meant to last. It wasn't built for permanence. It was built for an idea. Akhenaten didn't just change the religion. He tried to bend the soul of an entire civilization. And civilizations don't always bend. Sometimes they snap. He rejected centuries of tradition, booted entire priesthoods out of their power base, rewrote sacred art, and tried to cram a whole solar theology into one generation. Bold? Absolutely. But you can't outrun gravity or bureaucracy. Still, the memory of Akhenaten lingers like dust on a forgotten altar. You find it in the shapes of stones repurposed in later buildings, in hieroglyphs hastily carved over older ones, names scratched out, new ones squeezed in little curiosities like a child's broken doll with Aten rays faintly painted on its back, unearthed by tomb workers decades after the city fell quiet. Not everything was erased, just displaced. In tombs and temples across the land, archaeologists centuries later will find pieces of his reign. Odd art styles, weird proportions, unfinished reliefs. They'll scratch their heads and argue, was this a failed revolution or the earliest expression of monotheism? A true prophet or just a man playing God? Historians still argue whether Akhenaten believed in Aten with all his heart, or just needed a divine monopoly to cut through Egypt's complex pantheon. You wonder the same thing. It's easy to laugh now at the androgynous art and the long-necked portraits. Easy to call him the heretic king, a footnote to Tutankhamun's glittering afterlife. But you lived through it. You saw the ambition, the obsession, the sincere, sun-drenched madness of it all. Akhenaten didn't just want power. He wanted purity. He wanted to drag Egypt into a different kind of eternity. One where the sun's light needed no intermediaries, no statues, no temple labyrinths. Just you, the sky, and the radiant face of creation. Too bad that vision doesn't keep crops growing or borders safe. Back in the crumbled remains of the palace, you come across a small chamber, mostly collapsed. Broken pillars and half-buried frescoes line the floor. One wall still bears a faint painting. Akhenaten, arms raised to Aten, flanked by his daughters. Their faces have been chipped out, their names faded. But the sun disk still shines overhead, its rays reaching down with tiny hands. It's eerie, quiet, beautiful. And then you see it, carved hastily in a dark corner, as if someone left it in secret. May Aten's rays warm what the gods have forgotten. A prayer, a rebellion, a goodbye. You stand there longer than you mean to, watching the dust swirl in slants of light. And for a moment, just a moment, it almost feels like the city breathes again. But outside this little room, Egypt has moved on. The priesthood of Amun is back in full force. Massive temples rise in Karnak and Luxor. The gods march again in processions, heavy with gold and incense. The people sing hymns that have been sung for 1,000 years. The monuments of Seti-Wam and Rameses II explode across the land like thunderclaps of traditionalism. Everything Akhenaten tried to erase, doubled down in sandstone. His memory becomes dangerous. Pharaohs issue decrees to strike his name from history. His statues are ground down, his tomb desecrated, his family line dissolved into rumor. It's called damnatio memoriae, the destruction of memory. They believe if no one remembers him, he'll never exist again. That the sun can't rise for those forgotten. But you know that's not how memory works. You carry his story. So do others. A builder here, a priest's child there, a scribe who kept a hidden tablet under the floorboards. Whispers leak through generations. Eventually, scribes of the 19th dynasty will record his name again. Cautiously, critically. But they're all the same. Akhenaten becomes a puzzle for the ages. The man who tried to erase the gods ends up carved into the questions we keep asking centuries later. Was he insane? Enlightened? Just tired of Egypt's spiritual clutter? Or maybe, he just saw something the rest of us couldn't. You leave Akhenaten for the last time, watching the horizon blur into gold and heat. No soldiers guard its gates now. No priests chant at dawn. No flowers bloom in royal gardens. You leave Akhenaten for the last time, watching the horizon blur into gold and heat. No soldiers guard its gates now. No priests chant at dawn. No flowers bloom in royal gardens. But Aten still rises over its hills. Every single day. You're older now. Wiser. Maybe. And Egypt is back to being Egypt. Predictable, grand, familiar. The temples echo with the old hymns once more. Gods sit happily in their gilded shrines, and the sun, well, the sun doesn't seem offended by any of it. But Akhenaten's ghost still lingers. Not the spooky kind, just the idea of him. You find yourself working near Karnak now. The biggest temple complex in the known world. It stretches like a maze of stone ribs under the sky, pulsing with ritual. On feast days, the air smells of lotus and roasted duck. On quieter days, it smells of ambition, and tucked behind the grand hypo-style hall, there's a little puzzle, a wall where the stones don't quite match. You run your fingers across them. Some are older, the carvings chiseled flat. Then newer ones slapped over, all angles and symmetry. It doesn't take a genius to figure out what happened. They reused blocks from Akhenaten, thousands of them, called talatat blocks, small standardized limestone pieces used for speedy temple construction in Akhenaten's reign. After his fall, they were yanked from his city's skeleton and recycled like yesterday's news. Now they're buried inside massive columns, layered into hidden passageways, crammed into walls like forgotten thoughts. You spot a fragment showing the royal family beneath Aten's rays, carved sideways into the foundation of an entirely different shrine. It's upside down, head first into the dark. And yet it survived. Akhenaten's city might have crumbled, but his stone-by-stone footprint is still hiding in the bones of Egypt. Later, when archaeologists like Lepsius and Petrie show up centuries after your time, they'll spot this too. They'll pull these blocks from the depths like puzzle pieces, scratching their heads at the weird style. The sunbeams with little hands, the long faces, the floating Ankh kisses. "What is this?" they'll ask. And boom, Akhenaten will rise again. But back in your world, no one's digging. Not yet. You keep your curiosity quiet, too loud, and someone might accuse you of heresy. No one wants to be seen fondly remembering the pharaoh who called Amun a myth. So instead, you sneak glances, wonder quietly, ask questions with your eyes and not your voice. You notice small inconsistencies in the official records, erasures that feel more like clumsy edits than clean deletions. A scratched-out cartouche here, an unfinished prayer there. It's like Egypt is trying to forget something it still secretly dreams about. One day you meet a visiting priest from Nubia. He's younger than you, wide-eyed, asking a million questions about the Aten period like a kid poking a scar. You tell him a few things, carefully. He nods, wide grin, and says, "You know, maybe he wasn't wrong." You look around, half expecting thunder, but no lightning bolt falls, just the sun climbing higher, doing what it always does. You begin to wonder, what if that's the joke? What if Akhenaten didn't get it wrong? What if he just said the quiet part out loud? That all gods begin somewhere, that all temples eventually crumble, that the only real constant is the sun. Historians still argue whether Akhenaten's Atenism was meant to abolish other gods entirely, or merely elevate Aten to a dominant role. Was it monotheism, henotheism, or a political strategy dressed in spiritual robes? You don't have the answer, but you know this: he made you feel something, hope, awe, confusion, maybe fear. You felt the world tilt, just a little, just enough to see it differently. And now, you spend your evenings teaching young scribes how to write the old hymns, how to draw Amun with his double plumes and Thoth with his ibis head. But sometimes, just sometimes, you scribble a sun disk in the margin. No name, just the circle, just the rays. One night, walking home past the Nile, you see the reflection of the sun on the water's surface. It wobbles, dances, bends with the current, but it's still the sun. And you think, maybe that's how truth works too. You start noticing how much of Akhenaten's world didn't really vanish. It just evolved. His art style, his city planning, even his theological framework, echoes of it ripple through time. Not in the bold way he imagined, but in quiet shifts, subtle patterns. The occasional curve where once everything was square. And then there's Tutankhamun's tomb. No one knows about it yet, but you remember the day he died. The rushed burial, the whispered confusion about which tomb to use. His golden mask, crafted in a hurry. Some say it might have originally belonged to a woman. Maybe even Nefertiti. Maybe not. The scholars of the future will debate that one until their eyebrows fall off. You leave Akhenaten for the last time, watching the horizon blur into gold and heat. No soldiers guard its gates now, no priests chant at dawn, No flowers bloom in royal gardens, but Aten still rises over its hills. Every single day. You're back in the Theban hills now, the sun a soft smear on the western horizon. The tombs nearby, cut deep into the rock, are solemn places filled with prayers and precision. Everything here speaks of eternity, of order, of the old gods doing what they've always done, ferrying the dead from chaos into bliss. But Akhenaten's tomb, that's a different story. You heard about it through an old stonecutter who once worked near the cliffs of Amarna. He swore the king's body was never truly settled, that the burial was rushed, that something strange happened in that lonely valley where Akhenaten wanted to sleep beneath the sun, forever bathed in its light. So you travel, not officially. This isn't a state pilgrimage or a scholarly expedition. It's just you, a small satchel, and the uncomfortable realization that you've never really let go of him, of the city, the sun, the strange beauty of his impossible dream. The cliffs around Amarna look different now. Erosion has worn away much of the crisp outlines, but the royal tomb, it's still there. Cut into the eastern cliffs, facing the rising sun, an odd choice when everyone else faces west, toward the realm of the dead. Typical Akhenaten. You step inside. It's colder than you expect. Dust clings to the air like ancient breath. The walls, once painted with hymns and radiant sun rays, are mostly faded. Some scenes were never finished. Lines of figures left without faces, gods half-carved and abandoned. The burial chamber yawns open like a mouth that never quite closed. And there's no sign of a mummy. Historians still argue whether Akhenaten was ever buried here at all. Some say his body was moved, first from Akhetaten to Thebes, then perhaps even desecrated and scattered. Others whisper that Nefertiti hid him away, burying her king in a secret location far from angry priests and vengeful successors. And then there's the fringe theory, that he was never buried, that he simply disappeared. You don't buy that last one, but you admit it's got flair. More likely, his tomb was looted. Or maybe his successor, the boy king Tutankhamun, had him moved to diffuse political tensions. You imagine the council of advisors, tense and tired, deciding what to do with the remains of a god-defying pharaoh. Re-enter him quietly, someone might have said. Erase the name, burn the records. It didn't work, clearly. You run your fingers over a carving near the chamber's edge. It's Aten, of course, sunbeams ending in tiny hands, reaching down toward the royal family. The faces have been scratched off, not weathered, deliberately destroyed. An act of rage or fear. You think about that a lot. How easily memory becomes a battlefield. Back in Thebes, you once watched a priest rechisel a name on a tomb wall. Not because he hated the man, but because the man had fallen out of favor. His name had to go. It was as simple and as cruel as wiping away a smudge. But with Akhenaten, it was more than a name. It was a whole way of seeing the world. And still, here you are. His name may be banned, but it echoes. In secret conversations, in smuggled relics, in the strange flicker of recognition when someone sees an old sun disk carved into a forgotten lintel. You sit down on the cold stone floor of his tomb. Let your eyes adjust. Let the shadows settle. And for a moment you try to picture him here, not as a pharaoh, not as a heretic, but as a man, alone, surrounded by silence. Did he regret it? The isolation, the stubbornness, the ambition so big it swallowed everything? You'll never know. No one will. But part of you hopes he was proud, that he died thinking he'd built something eternal, even if it was made of sand and idealism. Outside, the sun has risen higher. A stray beam manages to pierce the tomb's entrance and slants across the floor, just enough to kiss the edge of a carved ankh. And just like that, he's here again. You return to your feet. Dust off your hands. You take one last look at the chamber before heading out, knowing that others will one day find it again. Tourists, scholars, kids with flashlights and big questions. They'll gawk at the art, marvel at the scale, maybe even roll their eyes at the over-the-top theology. But they'll remember him. You make your way back down the cliffs, and the wind follows you like a whisper. Down below, the Nile glitters, indifferent and eternal, and on your walk back you find a half-buried shard in the dust. It's pottery, simple, unassuming. But there, in faded ochre paint, is the unmistakable curve of a sun disk. Aten, in miniature. You slip it into your satchel, not as treasure, just as proof. Proof that even shattered things leave shadows. Later that night, back in your modest room in Thebes, you light a lamp. The flame dances on the wall, and for just a moment, you cast your own silhouette on the mud brick. And it hits you. That's all any of us really are. Flickers, shadows, trying to cast something bigger than ourselves. You're in your twilight years now, bones a little creaky, hair a little less enthusiastic, patience worn thinner than a papyrus scroll used one too many times. But you still remember the sun-drenched city that once rose out of the desert like a dream. Akhetaten, his city. It drifts into your thoughts like incense smoke, slow, golden, and just out of reach. But something curious has happened over the decades. Akhenaten's name? It's starting to pop back up. Not officially, of course. No one's etching it in gold or naming their firstborn after him. But whispers carry, especially among the curious young ones who ask all the annoying questions. Why did he do it? What if he was right? And here's the kicker. They're not even angry when they say his name, just fascinated. You hear about a sculptor who's experimenting with Amarna-style faces again. Long necks, curved cheeks, eyes like tilted almonds. A little scandalous, sure, but beautiful in a way that feels strangely fresh. There's even a rumor that a local noble requested a sun disk carved over his courtyard. Discreet, but unmistakable. And every now and then, someone finds a talatat block reused in a wall. They dust it off, squint at the faint figures etched beneath the surface, and recognize that signature scene. The royal family basking in rays, holding out offerings to a god with no face, no feathers, no crocodile head. Just light. You think, well, look who's creeping back into fashion. Historians still argue whether the entire Amarna period was an aberration, a brief, wild swing in Egypt's pendulum, or whether it left a lasting scar on Egyptian theology, art, and politics. But what's clear is that erasure never truly works. You can cover a wall, but people still remember what used to be painted there. You start keeping a little journal. Nothing grand, just notes, observations, memories. What the city smelled like in spring, how the sun felt at mid-morning, the way Akhenaten used to walk, not like a king, but like someone always halfway between a thought and a prophecy. You write it all down because someone should. Because eventually someone will want to know. There's a fringe theory bubbling up among a few rogue scribes that Nefertiti ruled after Akhenaten's death. Not just as regent, but as pharaoh in her own right. Disguised, perhaps, under the name Smenkhare. Or maybe not disguised at all. Maybe she stepped into power the way you slip into cold water. Slowly, deliberately, fully. If that's true, then the end of Amarna wasn't quite as sudden as everyone thinks. Maybe it stretched out, softened by her hand. Maybe she tried to steer it gently back toward normalcy without breaking the whole machine. You imagine her sitting on the throne, brow furrowed, deciding which parts of her husband's dream to keep, and which ones to quietly shelve. And then there's Tutankhamun, the boy with the golden mask. He too walked the line between worlds, raised in Akhetaten, then shuffled back to Thebes under heavy political pressure, forced to reverse what his father had done. His name was originally Tutankhaten, after all. Living image of the Aten. But not for long. That's the thing about kings. Even they don't get to choose their legacies. You start teaching again. Just a few students. Bright ones. One girl, in particular, keeps asking about the Aten. She draws sun discs in the sand when she thinks no one's looking. You say nothing. You just smile. You tell them the sanitized version of the past when the priests are listening. But when the air is still and the candles are low, you tell them what it felt like to stand in the central plaza of Akhetaten as the morning light spilled through the columns. You describe the silence, not empty, but full, brimming. You tell them that for a moment, Egypt tried something bold. And maybe that's enough. You've noticed a change in how people talk about the past now. Less venom, more curiosity. Akhenaten's still officially a heretic, sure, but he's becoming intriguing. Like a puzzle no one quite solved, or a riddle carved into a monument that's half swallowed by sand. One evening, an old friend brings over a scroll he found in the back of an archive. It's incomplete, damaged by mold and time, but the handwriting is unmistakable. Amarna, period. And there, among the faded glyphs, is a phrase you haven't seen in years. The living Aten, whose rays shine forever. You touch the parchment with reverence, not because you worship Aten, not because you think Akhenaten was right, but because memory, in any form, is sacred. Later, lying awake, you wonder what Akhenaten would have thought if he knew that bits of his world would survive like this. Not in monuments or armies, but in the minds of ordinary people. Not as gospel, but as question marks. Maybe that's the better legacy. Because you can destroy a temple, but you can't kill an idea. You close your eyes and picture the sun rising over the old city. Just a memory now, but vivid. And you realize Akhenaten didn't just build a city. He built a lens. A way of looking at the sky and asking, what if? And that, you whisper into the darkness, is how revolutions begin. You've always known Egypt is a place that remembers and forgets in equal measure. A strange talent, really, like a scribe who carefully records history with one hand and then erases it with the other. But lately the scales seem to be tipping. More people are starting to ask about the man with the elongated skull and the god made of sunlight. And here you are again, brushing sand off a chunk of carved limestone. It's not glamorous work. Your back protests with every bend, and your knees sound like a miniature percussion ensemble. But when your fingers trace the faint outline of a cartouche, and you squint to see what's left of a name, Akhenaten, you feel something stir. Even in pieces, he persists. There's talk now, even in some official circles, of reassessing the Amarna period. You hear one scholar call it an important spiritual experiment, and you almost laugh aloud. Spiritual experiment? Sure. If you call torching your entire pantheon and bulldozing the old gods an experiment, still it's something. A crack in the wall of silence. Some even wonder if Atenism laid a tiny seed for later monotheistic traditions. That fringe idea's floated for years. The concept of a single unseen god, universal and omnipresent. Ring any bells? Historians still argue whether that's just retroactive pattern seeking or a genuine influence. After all, Egypt touched everything. And everyone. You wander the markets in Thebes one afternoon, distracted by the smell of cumin and sweat, when you spot it. A crude little pendant hanging in a seller's stall. Not gold, not even bronze, just fired clay. But etched into the center is a sun disk, simple and unmistakable. The rays stretch down toward a tiny figure with arms raised. Not labeled, not spoken aloud, but you know who it is. You buy it for a few copper pieces. The vendor winks, says, old charm for warmth and protection. You don't argue. You tuck it in your pouch and walk away smiling. Back in your study, you add it to your modest collection of forbidden memories. Fragments of the city, a broken comb, a pottery shard with a hymn scrawled in haste. The kind of things that escape grand histories but live on in quiet corners. You spend more time at your desk now, writing, rewriting. You want to get it right, not just the facts, but the feeling. What it meant to be there. What it felt like to believe that a new world was actually possible. You're not naive anymore, of course. You know now what ambition costs. But that doesn't mean you've stopped caring. Sometimes younger scribes come to you for stories. They want to know what really happened. You tell them the truth. Your truth. Not just about Akhenaten, but about Nefertiti, about Meritaten, about the sculptors who shaped the strange new style, and the guards who followed orders they didn't understand, about the farmers who tried to grow wheat under a blazing sky and wondered if the old gods were angry. One boy asks if Akhenaten was mad. You think for a moment. No, you say softly. He was just too far ahead. You don't mean it as a compliment. You mean it like a warning. The further ahead someone walks, the more likely they'll be alone. And alone he was. That much is clear now, even surrounded by family, priests, advisors, queens. He still seemed to stand apart, like he was listening to music only he could hear. And maybe that music was beautiful. Maybe it told him to build something no one had dared before. But the thing about visions is, they don't always come with instructions. One night, you wake with an idea. You rummage through your old notes and find the hymn you've copied dozens of times, the great hymn to the Aten. You know it by heart. You've always loved its lines, not for their devotion, but for their imagery, their peace, their boldness. You begin translating it again, not into another language, but into poetry. Something modern, something warm. You want people to feel it, not just read it. To hear the pulse of sunlight in the syllables, to imagine standing beneath a sky so vast and golden it could blind you with grace. And slowly your little translation spreads. You overhear someone reading it aloud in a garden, mistaking it for a contemporary prayer. Another time, a merchant hums a melody you set to one of its verses. You don't say a word. You just smile into your cup of beer and sip quietly. Because this is how it happens. Not with monuments or edicts, not with war or fire, but with words, with whispers, with warmth. Someone once told you the Aten was a cold god, distant, impersonal, but you never agreed. You remember how the light felt in Akhenaten, how it wrapped around your skin like a second breath, how the city's white walls glowed at dawn. That wasn't cold, that was joy. In your old age, you've learned not to argue with cynics. Let them scoff, let them dig their trenches around dusty dogma. Meanwhile, you keep planting little sun discs wherever you can. And one day, as you're walking by the riverbank, you pass a group of children skipping stones. One of them is singing. The words don't quite register at first, but then you hear it. One of the lines from your translation, sung in a childish melody. He doesn't know where it came from. He's just repeating what he heard. But that's the thing, isn't it? Ideas travel. And some, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of resurfacing. Warm and golden, like a ray of sunlight through clouds. You wake one morning to the soft rustle of palm fronds and the smell of dust baked into everything. Papyrus, linen, even your breakfast. And somewhere in that stillness, a realization settles into your bones. You're one of the last who remembers it clearly. Not the broken stories or painted-over propaganda, but the feeling of Akhenaten when it was new. Sometimes that truth makes your chest tighten. Sometimes it makes you chuckle. You watch the younger scribes, scholars, and curious wanderers paw through fragments like they're treasure hunters. They see mystery in every scrap. You see memories, that chipped relief they're puzzling over. You remember when it was installed, the priest they can't quite identify. He used to snore through sunrise rituals. But you don't correct them. It's better this way, letting them wonder, letting them build the story from the ashes. What you do correct, though, are the whispers, that Akhenaten failed. That word, so final, so smugly neat, makes your skin itch. You argue gently that failure isn't the whole story, that sometimes greatness looks like ruin when seen too close, that it's easy to dismiss a man who stared into the sun until the rest of the world blurred. Historians still argue whether Akhenaten's religious reforms were sincere, political, or just plain delusional. Maybe all three, maybe none. Maybe he simply believed too hard, and that alone is enough to shake a kingdom. More and more, you've noticed visitors returning to the site of the old city. Pilgrims of a sort. They step through the rubble, whispering, wondering. Not in large numbers. This isn't Thebes or Giza, but enough to stir the dust and wake the ghosts. You meet a few. Some want facts, others want meaning. One asks if you think Akhenaten will ever be seen as a hero. You pause, choose your words carefully. No, you say. But maybe as something braver. It's the best answer you can offer, because he wasn't a hero, not really. Heroes are tidy things wrapped in marble and myth. Akhenaten was messier than that. Too strange, too human, too unwilling to play by the script. And in that mess, he carved something lasting. There's a fresh scholarly theory brewing, oh, bless the scholars, always stirring the pot, that claims Akhenaten's city planning influenced later sacred architecture. That the layout of Akhetaten, with its deliberate alignment to the rising sun, sparked a trend in temple design that echoed long after his memory was scraped from stone. You find that oddly comforting. Like discovering a faded thumbprint on history's blueprints. Back home, your little collection grows. A few new items, a reconstructed sunshade from a market stall, a piece of jewelry designed in the Amarna style. Long lines, elegant symmetry, none of the heaviness of old Theban excess. It's as if artists, freed from the yoke of fear, briefly remembered how to breathe. And once you've seen that kind of beauty, it never quite leaves you. You meet a young woman, sharp-eyed, full of questions, who reminds you of yourself. She reads your notes, devours your stories, draws her own conclusions. She doesn't just want to know what happened, she wants to know why. Why a king would risk everything, why a people would follow, why a god without a face could feel so personal. You give her the pendant, the clay Aten disc from the market. She holds it like it's fragile as memory. Don't lose that, you say. I won't, she promises. You don't know if she means the charm or the story. Maybe both. And here's the strange twist in it all. The priests, for all their power, couldn't bury the idea. The generals, for all their force, couldn't stomp it out. Time, for all its erosion, couldn't erase every trace. In art, in whispers, in half-remembered hymns and sunlit layouts of forgotten cities. He survived. A few weeks later, you attend a small gathering. Think of it as a historical salon, minus the wine plus a lot of sandals. The topic? The legacy of Akhenaten. No one dares praise him too loudly, of course, but the tone is shifting. Less condemnation, more curiosity. A young priest even wonders aloud if monotheism might one day return, not as decree, but as choice. You sip your tea and try not to spit it all over your scroll. And then it hits you. This is how it begins again. Not with monuments or temples, but with permission. Permission to question, to revisit, to imagine. You walk home beneath the stars, no moon tonight, just the cool hush of the Nile breeze and a sky peppered with eternity. You find yourself whispering the first lines of the hymn you memorized all those years ago. Not as prayer, not as tribute, just remembering. You never thought you'd live to see this moment, when remembering no longer feels dangerous, when the name Akhenaten can be said aloud without scandal, when the light he worshipped starts to feel less blinding and more warm. One day someone will build again. Maybe not a city, maybe just a garden or a poem or a painting, but it will carry his echo, and that, you think, is enough. The air tonight is thicker than usual, filled with the scent of river reeds and distant incense. You sit by your window, staring at a small oil lamp whose flame dances like a memory that refuses to burn out. You've started to think of the Aten not just as a sun disk, but as something more abstract, a symbol for all things that glow briefly and fade slowly. And somehow that brings you back to Akhenaten. It's strange, isn't it? How someone erased so completely has managed to haunt history with such persistence. His statues were shattered, his name chipped out, his temples repurposed, but like spilled ink, traces of him seeped into the cracks of time. You can try to blot him out, but he always bleeds through. You meet an old stonemason one afternoon, his hands like tree bark, his memory sharper than you expect. He tells you how, when he was a boy, his grandfather whispered stories of the Sun King who made the gods jealous. The phrase makes you smile. It's not historically accurate, but it captures the essence. And in a way, that's the point. Truth isn't always in the names and dates. Sometimes it's in the impressions left behind, the moods, the shapes, the shadows. You're noticing more of them now, in a festival banner's design, in the curving lines of a child's drawing, in a merchant's talisman that looks suspiciously like the Aten, with its rays reaching down not just to the royal family, but to everyone. That's the part people often forget. Akhenaten's god wasn't just for kings. The art showed sunlight touching servants, musicians, even oxen. It was revolutionary. And honestly, kind of adorable. Imagine divine approval falling equally on a pharaoh and a goat. It's the theological version of a group hug. Some scholars still say this was just propaganda, that Akhenaten used art to look relatable. Maybe. Or maybe for a moment he actually believed in shared divinity. You're not here to settle that. You're just here to notice the echoes. There's a new artist in town. Young, moody, perpetually smudged with paint. He started a series of reliefs inspired by Amarna art. Elongated limbs, intimate gestures, sunbeams like fingers. You walk by his workshop sometimes and peek through the open door. He doesn't know your face, but he's painting your memories. One day he catches you looking and calls out, "You like this weird style?" You smile. "I lived it." He laughs like it's a joke. You let him. What would he say if he knew you once watched Nefertiti cradle her infant under that exact pose, the mother goddess silhouette carved 1,000 times, now resurrected in ochre and dust? What would any of them say? History is a game of mirrors. People think they're discovering something new, but they're really just catching reflections of old light. And Akhenaten, well, he's the mirror that keeps turning up in the most unexpected places. Even the temples of Amun, which once thundered with condemnation, now host the occasional scholar who dares mention the heretic king without spitting. You hear them debate in hushed voices. Should he be taught? Should he be forgiven? Should he be remembered? You lean in, not to answer, but to listen. And that's when it hits you again. This was never about just a king or a god. It was about daring to imagine the world differently. About looking up and thinking, what if this light touches everyone? What if there's something bigger than tradition and thicker than power? It's an idea so fragile yet so persistent. At night, in the quiet, you reread your old notes. The handwriting is shaky now, and your ink stains more than it sticks. But still, the pages breathe with life. You can almost hear the distant hymns, the rustle of linen robes, the thud of bare feet on sun-warmed stones. Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten. It was never meant to last. You know that now. Cities built on revolution rarely do. They blaze, they crumble, they leave behind ghosts in sunbeams. But what a blaze it was. You remember the laughter of children splashing in rooftop basins, the smell of dates warmed by the sun, the way the temples filled with golden silence just before the morning hymn began. You remember hope? That's what's hardest to explain to those who weren't there. Not the politics, not the theology, but the sheer audacity of hope, raw, reckless, radiant. The idea that something truly new could be made. You don't claim Akhenaten was perfect. Far from it. He made enemies faster than friends. He ignored famine warnings. He may have pushed too hard, too fast, on people too rooted in old ways. He lived in a world of sun and shadow and sometimes forgot how harsh midday light can be. But even now, you think of him with a strange kind of tenderness. He wasn't a god. He wasn't a villain. He was just a man who looked at the sun and decided it was enough. Maybe that's his legacy. Not temples, not theology, just the challenge he left behind. What if you looked beyond the familiar, even if it burned your eyes? You stare into the flickering lamp beside you. The flame dances, the shadows shift. The past somehow feels present. The wind sighs across your balcony as you ease into your favorite seat, the one with the worn cushion and just the right creak in the backrest. In the distance, the desert sleeps, golden dust curling beneath the moonlight. You close your eyes for a moment and let your breath settle into the quiet rhythm of night. It's been years, so many years, since the sun last rose over Akhenaten, and yet somehow it feels closer now than it ever did in those hot, blinding mornings of youth. They call this city Tel El Amarna now. The bones of Akhenaten's dream still lie beneath the sand, not quite dead, not quite alive, just waiting. And people keep coming. Tourists with guidebooks, historians with notebooks, pilgrims with wide eyes and sun hats too big for the wind. You meet one of them today. She's young, with ink on her fingers and questions on her lips. She asks what the city felt like, not just what it looked like. You tell her it felt like something was always about to happen. Like the sun might split open and speak. That surprises her. You smile and add, sometimes it did. Historians still argue whether Akhenaten was mad or brilliant or both. The newer theory claims he was simply modern. Too modern. A man born 3,000 years early, dreaming of abstraction, equality, inner devotion. In an age that wanted statues and sacrifices. You get that. Maybe that's why people are finally beginning to see him not as a cautionary tale, but as a possibility. More artists now are adopting Amarna forms. More philosophers are citing Akhenaten in lectures on religious reform and state power. One university is even offering a course called The First Monotheist, with a question mark that's doing a lot of heavy lifting. And while some still scoff, others lean in, that question mark invites curiosity, not condemnation. You love that. Even in politics, especially in politics, you see little flickers. A speech about unity that quotes the great hymn to the Aten without attribution. A foreign ambassador wearing a pin shaped like a sun disk. A temple restoration that, quietly, without fanfare, includes a carving of the royal family under the Aten. Not big moves, but enough to suggest Akhenaten's story is being whispered again, not shouted, not sung, but gently reintroduced. You stand one evening in what used to be the palace gardens. There's no grand colonnade anymore, no dancers twirling in the dusk. Just sand, broken stones, and the distant glint of the river. But if you close your eyes, you can still hear laughter, flutes, the rustle of linen as Queen Nefertiti stepped past you on her way to the temple. Do you remember how the air changed when she passed? Like the world inhaled. And Akhenaten, always behind her, or beside her, rarely in front, holding her hand, fingers long and bony, but gentle. That's what you try to explain to the skeptics, that even if you strip away the theology and politics, there was love in that city, a kind of shared intimacy, public and private, a world trying, awkwardly, bravely, to be better. No one ever writes that in the records. You return home to find a letter from your apprentice, the sharp-eyed one you gave the pendant to. She's found a tiny tablet buried under a collapsed shrine, etched with a child's drawing. A stick figure holding hands with a taller one under a sun disk. No names, no symbols, just joy. She writes, "I think this is what survived." And you believe her. The Aten may have been forsaken by kings, but not by children, not by dreamers, not by those who see meaning in light and pattern in warmth. You sit quietly for a while, the sun having long since set. You trace invisible rays on the tabletop, remembering the way they reached for everything. For bakers and builders, for cats sunbathing on windowsills. For you, the Aten was never jealous, never angry. It just was. A light that asked nothing, gave everything, and left behind the strangest, most beautiful failure in Egyptian history. Failure. Such an odd word for something that still glows, isn't it? There's one more thing you've been holding on to, a piece of papyrus with lyrics from the great hymn. The ink's faded. You've read it 1,000 times, and still the final lines always get you. You are distant, but your rays are upon the earth. You whisper them one last time, not because you believe in the Aten, necessarily, but because you believe in what he represented. Wonder, transformation, and a dangerous kind of honesty. Tonight, you light a single oil lamp. The flame flickers, casting soft halos against the wall. It's enough. You've told the story. You've remembered the strange king. You've passed the torch. And somewhere beyond this tiny room, the sun prepares to rise again. So now, as the shadows stretch long and the quiet presses close, you can feel the dust of Akhenaten settle back into sleep. The city is gone, yes, but not entirely lost. The wind still traces its roads. The Nile still remembers the weight of its boats. And in the far corners of our minds, where the warm, slow thoughts drift before sleep, we carry pieces of it, like golden sand in our shoes. You stretch, sigh gently, and let your shoulders sink into your pillow. The world around you softens. The bright questions of history grow dimmer now, replaced by the hush of desert nights and the lull of distant river waves. Maybe Akhenaten wasn't a savior. Maybe he wasn't even right. But he dared to rewrite the world in sunlight. And though his city fell, the idea, oh, the idea, lingers like perfume from a vanished queen's robe. Take a slow breath. Hold it. Let it go. You've walked through palaces, markets, temples, and tombs tonight. You've heard prayers that once shook an empire. And now it's time to rest. Let the last image fade, a golden sun hanging low over a quiet city, and you, standing at the center, surrounded by silence and soft light. That's the horizon now, a warm, safe place where history hums gently and dreams rise like dawn. Sleep well, dream deeply, and may the Aten's rays, whether divine or metaphorical, kiss your eyelids as you drift off.